She was exiled to the death world until the human explorer arrived. Lyra pulled her cloak tighter around her thin frame, struggling to take another step. The landing pod had burned itself out upon impact hours ago, leaving her alone, stranded, and exposed. Kelara, the so-called Death World, was known across the galaxies for its uninhabitable environment. The story said no one could survive more than a few days without extensive supplies, and she had barely enough to last a week. Lyra wiped the sweat and dust from her brow, scanning the horizon. Jagged mountains rose like broken teeth in the distance, their peaks shrouded in a permanent layer of storm clouds. Strange, glowing plants dotted the plains, their colors shifting like liquid under the pale sun. She had read about them in old scientific texts, but seeing them in person was something entirely different. They were dangerous, yes, but beautiful in a harsh, alien way. Her heart sank as she remembered how she had arrived here, not as an explorer, not as a volunteer, but as an exile. On her home planet, she had challenged the Council of Traditions, proposing that scientific knowledge should be shared freely and that exploration should not be limited to the elite. They had called her ideas dangerous, her curiosity reckless. And so, by law, she had been sentenced to exile on Kelara, a planet everyone else feared. Alone, she was left to survive where many had died. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to focus. Survival was her first priority. She looked down at the small survival kit she had managed to carry. Inside were basic rations, a few energy capsules, a small water purifier, and a multi-tool she had designed herself. She knelt and unpacked the supplies, studying the multi-tool. It was simple, but in her hands it became something extraordinary. She could use it to build shelter, trap small creatures for food, or analyze the strange soil and plants around her. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. The words felt fragile, but she needed them to be real. She began moving toward a small ridge where the wind was slightly calmer. As she walked, she examined the ground. The dust was thick, almost sticky, and the faint imprints of some alien creatures crossed her path. Large, six-legged beasts, she guessed, though she had only seen their shadows in the distance. Their tracks were fresh. She had to be careful. Kelara's wildlife could be as deadly as the storms. But even in the risk, Lyra felt a spark of excitement. She had always loved observing creatures, even dangerous ones. By evening, Lyra had reached a sheltered cave tucked between two jagged rocks. It wasn't much, but it would protect her from the night winds and the small, acidic rains that Kelara often brought. She unpacked a small heating device from her kit and placed it on the floor. As it hummed to life, she leaned back and studied her surroundings. The cave walls were covered in strange crystalline formations, glowing faintly with an inner light. Lyra's scientific mind buzzed with curiosity. Even in exile, Kelara had secrets to offer. She pulled out a notebook from her pack. Using a special pen, she began sketching the glowing plants she had passed on her way here. She noted their shapes, colors, and apparent behavior. Her exile had forced her into survival, but her mind refused to stop exploring. Each sketch, each observation was a small victory, a proof that she was still herself, still alive, still a scientist. Night fell quickly, and Kelara's true nature revealed itself. The temperature dropped sharply, and the winds outside turned into howling gales. Small, phosphorescent insects flew past the cave entrance, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Lyra wrapped herself in her cloak and huddled near the heating device. She listened to the storm outside, feeling a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Survival was not easy, but it was also alive with possibility. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by the howls of distant creatures or the rumble of shifting rocks outside. When she woke, she forced herself to move quickly. Her rations were limited, and she needed to find water before the small purifier ran dry. The planet seemed unyielding, but she refused to give in. She climbed higher into the rocky terrain, scanning for signs of streams or underground water sources. By mid-morning, she found a small depression filled with greenish liquid. It wasn't perfect, but her purifier could handle it. As the device hummed, cleaning the water, she allowed herself a small smile. Each success, no matter how minor, was a step closer to survival. She drank deeply, savoring the cold liquid. The days passed in a rhythm of survival and observation. Lyra learned to read the storms, predict their arrival, and seek shelter before the worst of the wind and rain hit. She mapped the local wildlife, noting their behaviors and feeding patterns. She experimented with the glowing plants, cautiously harvesting samples to study their properties. Some were edible, though bitter. Others produced tiny sparks when crushed, perhaps a defense mechanism. She kept careful notes in her notebook, marking every discovery. In moments of solitude, Lyra thought about home. She missed the bustling cities, the libraries, and even the crowded streets. But Kelara taught her patience, resilience, and observation. She realized that exile, while intended as punishment, had given her something unexpected: a chance to grow, to push herself beyond her limits, and to survive in a world that seemed impossible. One evening, as the twin moons of Kelara rose above the jagged horizon, Lyra climbed to the top of a ridge and looked out across the plains. The wind had died down, leaving a calm silence that stretched for miles. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace. She was alone, yes, but she was also alive, and alive meant she could continue to learn, explore, and survive. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I will go further. I will see what this world truly hides." Unseen in the distance, a shadow moved across the plains. Something or someone was coming. Lyra did not notice it yet, her mind focused on survival, on discovery, on the endless challenge of Kelara. But the universe had a way of bringing unexpected allies into lonely worlds, and soon, her exile would meet a visitor who would change everything. For now, she returned to her cave, tending to her fire and her notes, watching the glowing walls as if the crystals themselves were guiding her. Lyra had been cast out, left to the death world, but in her heart she carried hope. She carried curiosity. She carried the spirit that had led her to challenge the council of traditions, and that would not be extinguished by exile, storm, or solitude. Kelara was harsh, unyielding, and deadly, but it could not break her. It could not stop her from learning. It could not stop her from being herself. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon, something approached that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But Lyra was ready. She always was. The twin moons of Kelara had barely set when Lyra stirred from her makeshift bed inside the cave. The nights were cold, but her small heating device kept her warm. Today, she decided, she would explore further east, beyond the jagged ridge she had climbed the night before. She tightened the straps of her cloak, secured her multi-tool to her belt, and stepped into the reddish dust of the death world. The landscape had changed slightly since yesterday. Pools of greenish water glimmered in depressions, and the glowing plants that peppered the plains appeared more vibrant under the soft dawn light. Lyra paused, crouching to examine a plant she had not seen before. Its tendrils were thin and flexible, curling in rhythmic patterns as if sensing the wind. She reached out carefully, touching one with a gloved hand. The tendril recoiled instantly and released a puff of spark-like dust. Fascinated, she took careful notes in her notebook, sketching the plant and its strange defensive behavior. Her thoughts wandered to her home planet. She missed the libraries, the archives, and the buzzing streets, but she had discovered something valuable here. Kelara was not just a place to be feared. It was a place to be studied, to be understood. The exile had forced her to survive, yes, but it had also awakened a curiosity she had never fully realized before. Every storm, every plant, every strange track in the dust was a lesson. As the sun climbed higher, a distant humming sound reached her ears. At first she thought it was the wind, but it was different, more mechanical, precise. Lyra froze, scanning the horizon. Across the plains, a sleek object glinted under the sun. It was moving slowly but steadily. Her heart raced. Kelara was rarely visited by anyone, if anyone at all. The object drew closer. It was a spacecraft, small but clearly designed for exploration. Its hull was silver and smooth, reflecting the red dust of the planet. Lyra's mind raced. Who could be coming here? And why? She crouched behind a ridge, observing the ship carefully. Unlike the larger freighters she had seen in her studies, this one moved with purpose. It landed smoothly on the plains, kicking up a small cloud of dust. A hatch opened and a figure stepped out. Lyra could hardly believe her eyes. The being was bipedal, tall, with fair skin and dark hair. He wore a suit that gleamed faintly in the sun and carried a small device in his hand that blinked softly. Humans. She had heard of them. Stories in the archives described them as curious, resilient, and surprisingly adaptable. And now, one of them was here on Kelara, the Death World. The human noticed her immediately. At first, she thought he would be wary or even aggressive. But instead, he raised a hand in greeting. "Hello," he called. His voice was calm, friendly, and carried easily over the still air. Lyra hesitated. She had been alone for days, surviving on her own, and the sudden presence of someone else was both terrifying and thrilling. Slowly she stepped out from behind the ridge, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. The human smiled. "I didn't expect anyone else here," he said. "Name's Elias Turner. I'm an explorer." "I am Lyra," she replied cautiously. I live here." The words felt strange. To say she lived here on Kelara seemed almost humorous, given the harshness of the planet. But Elias did not laugh. He nodded thoughtfully, studying her with interest. "Well, Lyra," he said, "it seems we both like exploring strange worlds. Mind if I join you for a bit?" Lyra blinked. Join her. She had survived on Kelara alone, relying on her own skills and judgment. But something about Elias, his calm confidence, his curiosity, made her consider it. Slowly she nodded. "Be careful," she warned. "This planet is not easy." Elias chuckled lightly. "I'm counting on that." And so they began walking together, traversing the rocky plains. Elias asked questions constantly, fascinated by the glowing plants, the strange insects, and the tracks of alien creatures. Lyra answered carefully, showing him what was safe to touch and what was not. She demonstrated how she purified water and pointed out areas where small storms tended to form. As the day wore on, Lyra realized that Elias was remarkable, not in the way that technology was remarkable, but in the way that humans themselves were remarkable. He adapted quickly, observed keenly, and seemed to find joy in solving problems. He even helped her patch a small crack in her sheltered device, suggesting a minor adjustment she hadn't considered. The sun dipped low on the horizon when they reached a small canyon. Elias paused, studying the rock formations. "This planet has history," he said. "I can feel it. Look at these patterns in the stone. They're not natural." Lyra approached, running her fingers over the smooth surfaces. She had noticed the formations before but had assumed they were shaped by wind and water. Elias' words made her pause. Perhaps there was more here than she had realized. Perhaps Kelara was not only a test of survival but a world with secrets waiting to be discovered. Suddenly, a distant roar echoed through the canyon. Lyra's heart leapt into her throat. She motioned for Elias to stay back. A large creature emerged from the shadows, a six-legged beast with glowing eyes and thick, armored skin. It sniffed the air, its movements cautious but deliberate. Elias did not panic. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, waving it in a careful arc. A soft hum filled the air, and the creature hesitated, tilting its head. Lyra watched in amazement. Humans had a knack for invention, she realized. While she relied on observation and patience, Elias combined his tools with intuition to solve problems. The creature, after a moment, turned and disappeared back into the canyon. "Impressive," Lyra said softly, still catching her breath. Elias smiled. You taught me how to read the signs, I just help a little. For the first time since her exile, Lyra felt a warmth of companionship. Kelara had been lonely, unyielding, and often frightening. But now, with Elias here, the planet felt less like a prison and more like a world full of potential. Night fell and they made camp together in a small rock formation that offered shelter. Lyra shared her rations, and Elias contributed small packs of synthesized food from his ship. They talked, sharing stories of their worlds, their discoveries, and their hopes. Lyra learned that humans traveled not only to explore but to understand, to connect, to see the unknown and find meaning. She felt a strange kinship with this human, despite the differences between their species. I never thought anyone would come here, Lyra admitted, staring at the glowing crystals around them. I thought I was completely alone. Sometimes, Elias said thoughtfully, the universe just waits for the right people to meet. Maybe it sent me here because we both needed someone else. Lyra smiled faintly, feeling a sense of hope she hadn't experienced since her exile. Kelara was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but with Elias, she felt that challenges could be met, mysteries could be solved, and survival could be more than just a struggle, it could be an adventure. The following days were spent exploring together. Lyra taught Elias to recognize safe plants and water sources, while he showed her how to use small technological tools to map the terrain, measure the soil, and even track the movement of creatures from a safe distance. They shared knowledge freely, each learning from the other. Lyra marveled at how humans approach challenges, not with fear, but with curiosity and determination. One afternoon, as they climbed a ridge overlooking a vast valley, Elias pointed to a series of faint structures partially buried under dust and stone. "Look at that," he said. "Those shapes aren't natural. Someone or something built them." Lyra's heart quickened. She had suspected Kelara held secrets, but seeing the structures confirmed it. Perhaps her exile was not punishment alone. Perhaps it was preparation for discoveries that awaited only those patient and brave enough to survive. Together, they descended into the valley, careful and deliberate. The structures were old, ancient, and worn, but traces of advanced design remained. Lyra ran her fingers over the walls, deciphering symbols and patterns. Elias used his instruments to scan the material, noting energy readings that seemed to pulse faintly beneath the surface. "This planet has a story," Elias said softly, awe in his voice. "And I think we're the first to understand it in centuries." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. Exile had brought her here, yes, but it had also brought her to this moment. She had survived, learned, and now, with Elias beside her, she could uncover what no one else had dared to explore. As night fell over Kelara once more, the two explorers made camp at the edge of the ancient structures. The wind was quieter now, almost respectful, as if the planet itself was observing them. Lyra looked at Elias, feeling a sense of connection that went beyond words. Kelara was no longer just a death world. It was a place of discovery, of learning, and of partnership. Lyra's exile had turned into something new, an adventure that promised wonder, mystery, and perhaps a new beginning. And somewhere in the shadows of the valley, unknown to them, Kelara watched, waiting for what they would uncover next. The valley stretched before Lyra and Elias like a hidden world frozen in time. The ancient structures, half buried under layers of red dust and jagged stones, glimmered faintly in Kelara's dim light. Lyra's heart raced with excitement. She had studied ruins before, read descriptions in ancient texts, but nothing compared to standing in a place untouched for centuries, or perhaps millennia. Elias scanned the structures with his instruments, moving carefully but quickly. "There's energy here," he said. "It's subtle, but it's definitely there, like the planet itself is alive in this place." Lyra nodded. "These formations, they're not just buildings. They are laboratories, libraries, or maybe observatories. Whoever built them knew things we have yet to understand." She traced the edges of a smooth wall with her fingers, Strange symbols were etched into the stone, not random marks, but intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. "Look at this," she whispered. "There's meaning here hidden in the shapes." Elias crouched beside her, pointing at the symbols with a small stylus. "They might be mathematical," he said, "or instructions. I can run a scan and try to decode them." Together they worked. Lyra compared the patterns to sketches in her notebook, while Elias used his devices to scan the symbols for energy fluctuations, hidden frequencies, and structural anomalies. Hours passed like minutes. For the first time, Kelara did not feel hostile or dangerous. It felt like a partner, guiding them to something important. "This place is incredible," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It survived the storms, the dust, and everything else for hundreds of years. Whoever built it, they must have had a deep understanding of the planet." Elias nodded. "And now we get to learn from it." As they explored further, they found what appeared to be the main chamber of the structure. It was large, domed, and lined with strange crystals embedded in the walls. They pulsed faintly, glowing softly as if responding to their presence. Lyra's eyes widened. She had never seen crystals like these. They seemed to hum with energy, not just physically, but in a way that resonated in her mind. "This is more than architecture," she said. "It's a system, a network. It could store knowledge or even monitor the planet itself." Elias examined one of the crystals, carefully holding his device close. "There's data here," he said, "encoded in ways I haven't seen before. It's stable, almost like it's waiting for someone to read it." Lyra's fingers trembled with excitement. She had always dreamed of discovering something unknown, something that could change how civilizations understood science. Kelara, a planet meant to be a tomb for the exiled, had instead become a doorway to knowledge. They spent the next few days carefully navigating the ruins. Lyra mapped each chamber, noting strange devices, etched symbols, and unusual energy readings. Elias recorded everything with his scanners and small drones. Together, they created a picture of a civilization that had been advanced beyond anything currently known. One afternoon, as they entered a smaller chamber deep beneath the main dome, Lyra found a set of panels embedded in the wall. They were worn but still functional. The panels responded to touch, lighting up in soft blues and greens. Lyra pressed one lightly and symbols shifted, forming patterns that seemed to tell a story. "These are instructions," she said, "or maybe lessons. They are teaching something." Elias leaned over, studying the shifting lights. "It's incredible," he said. "Humans record information in books, computers, and servers. But this is alive. It interacts with you, responds to your actions. Whoever built this had a way of thinking far beyond our understanding." They spent hours experimenting with the panels, learning how to activate different functions. Some panels revealed maps of Kelara, showing areas they had not yet explored. Others displayed data about the planet's flora and fauna, including details that matched Lyra's own observations. It was as if the ancient builders had predicted someone like Lyra, someone curious and careful enough to survive here. "This planet," Lyra whispered one evening, "it's not a punishment, it's a test, a place for growth. Maybe exile was never meant to stop me. Maybe it was meant to prepare me." Elias smiled. "And now we're learning together. You survived alone and I brought some tools, but your knowledge, your patience, your ability to adapt, that's what's letting us uncover this." Lyra realized that he was right. Survival on Kelara had been difficult, but it had trained her mind to notice details, think ahead, and persist. Without that experience, she might not have been able to interact with the structures at all. Exile had sharpened her skills, made her ready for discovery. As they continued, Lyra found a small alcove containing what looked like a storage device. It was crystalline and delicate, humming softly. She touched it gently, and immediately a holographic image projected into the center of the room. Strange shapes and symbols floated in the air, moving in patterns that were difficult to comprehend. Elias gasped. It's a record, a history of whoever built this place. Lyra studied the image, slowly recognizing patterns that matched the crystals and panels around them. They were scientists, explorers, record keepers. They observed Kalara for centuries, cataloging every plant, every creature, every storm. This knowledge, it's immense. For the first time, Lyra felt a deep connection to the civilization that had built these structures. She was no longer just an exile, she was part of something larger. Her work, her survival, her curiosity, all of it aligned with the purpose of the ancient builders. Elias moved closer to her. "You know," he said, "humans always talk about courage and discovery. But what you're doing, it's more than courage. You've turned exile into opportunity. You're like them, Lyra, you're a bridge between what was lost and what can be learned." She smiled faintly. "I never thought of it that way. I just survived. And now I see there's more to survival than just staying alive. It's about understanding, learning, and growing." Over the next several days, they carefully explored more chambers, documenting the knowledge encoded in crystals, panels, and holograms. They discovered ways to harness Kalara's natural energy, hints of technologies that could aid survival in extreme conditions, and even maps of underground water systems that would make the planet far more habitable than anyone had imagined. Lyra's notes grew thick with sketches, symbols, and observations. Elias' instruments recorded volumes of data. Together, they were creating a new understanding of Kalara, a planet once feared, now a treasure trove of knowledge. One afternoon, as they examined a large chamber filled with glowing crystals, Elias looked around in awe. "Lyra, do you realize what this means? If we share this with the Interstellar Exploration League, civilizations across the galaxy could learn from Kalara. This knowledge, it could change how planets are explored, how life is studied, even how survival is taught." Lyra nodded, feeling a swell of pride. She had been exiled to this death world, condemned for her curiosity, but now that very curiosity had led to something extraordinary. She realized that her exile was not the end, it was the beginning. As they rested that evening, gazing at the glowing crystals that filled the chamber with soft light, Lyra spoke quietly. I think I understand why I'm here. This planet, it needed someone who could see beyond fear, someone who could survive and learn, and maybe someone who could teach others." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "And you've done that. Together, we can make this knowledge useful. Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after." For the first time in weeks, Lyra felt completely at peace. Kalara was no longer just a death world. It was a place of learning, growth, and connection. Exile had brought her here, yes, but it had also brought her purpose, a companion, and the chance to uncover mysteries that no one else could. The night settled over the valley, the crystals pulsing softly, as if acknowledging their presence. Lyra and Elias sat together, studying their notes and instruments, planning their next steps. Kalara had tested her, shaped her, and finally revealed its secrets, but there was still so much more to explore. And Lyra knew that, with Elias by her side, the challenges ahead would not just be obstacles, they would be opportunities. For the first time, she did not feel like an exile. She felt like an explorer. The sun rose slowly over Kalara, casting long shadows across the jagged plains and glowing crystals. Lyra stood at the edge of the valley, looking down at the ruins she and Elias had explored. For the first time, the planet felt less like a prison and more like a home, a place of discovery, growth, and endless possibilities. Elias approached, holding a small portable device filled with recordings of their findings. "I've compiled everything we've learned," he said. "Maps, symbols, energy readings, even the histories stored in the crystals. If we send this to the Interstellar Exploration League, they'll understand the value of Kalara and your work." Lyra smiled faintly. "All my notes, all my observations, they'll finally mean something. Maybe my exile wasn't just punishment, maybe it was preparation for this." She took a deep breath. And you've helped me see that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about understanding the world and helping others understand it too. Elias nodded. Humans believe that sharing knowledge is one of the greatest things we can do. But it's not just humans, it's anyone willing to learn and teach. You've done that, Lyra. You've turned exile into opportunity. For the next few days, they worked tirelessly to organize their findings. Lyra's sketches of the plants, the alien creatures, and the glowing crystals were combined with Elias' data scans. They documented the structure's functions, the hidden energy networks, and the lessons embedded in the crystalline panels. Every detail was preserved. One evening, as they rested, Lyra looked toward the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of sulfur and dust, but also a strange sweetness from the glowing plants nearby. "Do you think they'll understand?" she asked softly. "The council, the League, will they see the value in what we've found?" Elias smiled. "They'll understand. It's hard to ignore knowledge like this. And even if they hesitate, they can't deny that you survived this planet, learned from it, and uncovered secrets no one else could." Lyra felt a warm sense of pride. For weeks she had struggled to survive Kelara, and now she had uncovered something extraordinary. Her exile had not been the end, it had been the start of a journey she could never have imagined. The next morning, they prepared the signal device. Elias connected it to a network capable of transmitting their findings across light years. Lyra double-checked the data, ensuring that every sketch, note, and reading was included. Finally, she pressed the activation switch. A soft hum filled the air as the signal shot into space, carrying the story of Kelara and the work they had done. Somewhere far away, the Council of Traditions and the Interstellar Exploration League would receive it. Somewhere people who had doubted her would see the value of curiosity, patience, and perseverance. "That's done," Elias said, giving her a small nod. "Now it's out there." Lyra watched the glowing valley, the crystals pulsing softly, and felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known. She had survived, learned, and contributed something meaningful to the galaxy. And she had done it with a companion she trusted, a human who had proven that even the harshest worlds could be navigated with patience, curiosity, and ingenuity. Days later, a small spacecraft appeared on the horizon, not Elias' ship, but one from her home planet. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had expected that her exile might end someday, but not so suddenly. The Council had received the data, and now emissaries had come to see the results firsthand. Lyra approached the landing site cautiously. The officials stepped out, looking around at Kelara's landscape, then at her. "Lyra," one of them said formally, "we have received your report and your findings. We underestimated your abilities. Your exile was meant as punishment, but your work shows wisdom, courage, and remarkable insight. The Council is prepared to revoke your exile." Lyra felt a mixture of relief, pride, and curiosity. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I've learned so much here, and there's still more to discover. Kelara has much to teach if anyone is willing to listen." The officials nodded, impressed by her composure and understanding. They began discussing the next steps, plans to protect the planet's ancient knowledge, and how to integrate Lyra's discoveries into the wider scientific community. For the first time, Lyra realized that her exile had changed her, not just as an individual but as someone who could inspire others to think differently. When the officials left, Lyra turned to Elias. I have to go back," she said. "Home, but Kelara, it's part of me now. And I want to continue exploring it, learning from it." Elias smiled, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the crystals. "And I'll be here," he said. "If you want, we can explore together. There's so much left to uncover, and now we can do it without worrying about survival every second. We've learned enough to navigate this world safely." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest. In exile, she had been alone, tested by the harshest world she had ever faced. But now she had found a partner, a friend, and a companion in discovery. Together, they could continue learning from Kelara and perhaps other worlds as well. Over the following weeks, they began careful expeditions across Kelara. They charted underground rivers, documented previously unseen creatures, and experimented with the strange energy networks embedded in the crystalline structures. Every day was a new discovery, a new lesson, a reminder that knowledge and curiosity could turn even a death world into a place of wonder. One afternoon, as they rested atop a ridge overlooking the valley, Lyra spoke quietly. "I never imagined that exile would lead to this. I thought I would suffer, struggle, and survive, but I never imagined I would find purpose, friendship, and knowledge like this." Elias nodded. "Sometimes the universe has a strange way of turning challenges into opportunities. You survived because you were strong, curious, and brave. You thrived because you were willing to learn and adapt. That's what makes humans, and now you, extraordinary." Lyra smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had been cast out, judged, and left alone. But she had endured. She had learned from the planet, from the creatures, and from Elias. And now, she had the chance to share that knowledge, to inspire others, and to continue exploring without fear. Kelara was no longer a death world in her eyes. It was alive, full of secrets, lessons, and beauty waiting to be discovered. And she was no longer just an exile. She was an explorer, a learner, and a teacher. As the twin moons rose once more, casting a gentle light over the valley, Lyra and Elias stood together on the ridge. Below them, the glowing crystals pulsed softly, reflecting their determination and curiosity. The planet had tested them, shaped them, and now welcomed them as partners in discovery. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the wind on her face. "This is only the beginning," she said. Elias smiled. "Then let's make it the best beginning possible." Together, they looked out over Kelara, ready to explore, learn, and uncover the mysteries of a planet that had once been feared. The Death World had become a world of knowledge, friendship, and opportunity. And in its harsh beauty, Lyra had found herself, her purpose, and a future filled with endless possibilities. The galaxy was wide, full of challenges, discoveries, and mysteries. But with courage, curiosity, and cooperation, there was no frontier too dangerous, no secret too hidden, and no exile too great to overcome. Lyra had been cast out, but she had risen. She had turned punishment into discovery, isolation into partnership, and survival into inspiration. Kelara, the Death World, had given her a gift she would carry forever. The knowledge that even the harshest worlds could teach, the hardest journeys could inspire, and the brightest futures could begin in the most unlikely places. And so, the human and the exile stood together, gazing at the glowing valley below, ready to explore, to learn, and to show the galaxy that survival was only the beginning, and humanity, in all its ingenuity and spirit, could illuminate even the darkest worlds.